Welcome to the Hayden Group's Engage Brand Leadership Series. And we are the Hayden Group. We are a branding and marketing services agency that believes that market leadership begins with sound strategy and an engaging brand. And let me tell you a little bit about our firm, because we're not a nonprofit. We offer branding and marketing services, both inbound and outbound. I think our point of difference is that all of our services are brand centric. Our clients include everything from HP to Cisco. Some startups include companies like NeuroPace and Sungevity before they got big. So we're in the healthcare tech and green space.
They got big because of you.
Oh yes.
Yay.
Oh yes.
Right. Yeah.
It was that PowerPoint presentation that we did for that VC that we did.
There you go.
And we love working with funded startups, and we welcome all referrals. Funded being the operative word. We've asked Forrest North and Dr. Ellen Konar and Mike Calise to join us for our panel on the roadmap to the electric car, because they are all leaders in their field. And let me tell you a little bit about them. Forrest North is the founder and CEO of Xatori. He builds mobile apps to make electric vehicle ownership easier for customers. And that helps EV owners locate the nearest charging stations and monitor and control the state of the charge itself. Forrest has been involved with EV for nearly 10 years, including from designing Tesla's energy storage systems to founding and producing electric motorcycles at Mission Motors, which was featured in the Neiman Marcus Christmas catalog.
That was quite an honor.
That's the gold standard.
And Forrest is a Stanford grad. And Forrest, I understand you have some news about your company, and I will let you tell us about that later on when Richard starts moderating the panel. We also have with us Dr. Ellen Konar, and we asked Dr. Konar here for two reasons. One, because she was here, she served some time with A Better Place, and when she was with A Better Place, she was the Global Director of Consumer Marketing and Research. A Better Place is a global EV, or was a global EV infrastructure company. But beyond that, regardless of what's kind of happening with A Better Place, we're delighted to have Dr. Konar here, because Dr. Konar is known for being really a consumer marketing and research expert. And so we just really appreciate not only her expertise from A Better Place, but the expertise that she brings from her background at Google and at Intel. She comes from, she was, when she was at Intel, she was the marketing director there and an Intel fellow, the first Intel fellow outside of the engineering ranks, and the first woman to hold that title.
Yay!
Yay! She has taught at Stanford's Graduate School of Business and at Berkeley's Haas School. And with all this background, it won't be any surprise to you that she's now associated with the Lean In Foundation, associated with the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook, who has been in the news quite a lot lately. And she's also chairman of the board of a company called Mindset Works. And as the mother of a special needs son, I'm quite interested in having coffee with her at another time to better understand about Mindset Works. And then we also have Mike Calise, who is director at Schneider Electric, the world's energy management specialist, where he runs Schneider's North American EV business. He's been a clean tech executive for nearly a decade, focused on energy efficient computing for large data centers and supercomputers. Prior to Schneider Electric, Mike was the founder and CEO of EV Advise, an independent advisory firm focused on electric vehicle infrastructure deployments. He got his start at Intel, and he is also the lead author of Electrify Your Business, a guide for moving forward with electric vehicles. And finally, we are most grateful and delighted to have Dr. Richard Dasher modifying this panel. Dr. Richard Dasher directs 2 externally funded research centers at Stanford's School of Engineering, the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center, and the Center for Integrated Systems. Dr. Dasher is also very active as a private consultant. Dr. Dasher, I turn this panel over to you.
Victoria, thank you. And first of all, on behalf of everybody, thank you for opening up your home. You know, this is a really unusual kind of setting that we can have to talk about a topic that's really important to everybody. Not just because EVs are EVs, but really to look at what might happen and how we might get there from here. I'm going to start by asking our panelists to give their elevator pitches. A little bit about your background, what you're doing now, and real briefly, what do you see as the role for the EV in the transportation systems of the future? Forrest, you're the furthest away from me. Why don't you start? Tell us about your company merger first.
Sure, yeah. So just last week we announced that we merged. So Xatori is now Recargo. We merged with one of our friendly competitors, which has been a great move. And the elevator, pitch for that is that we now are really everything EV from an information and consumer standpoint. So we Recargo had previously acquired plugincars.com, which is a website that deals with news specifically about plug-in vehicles, and has a good user viewership, monthly viewership. And then they also have an analytics. We now have an analytics arm. So people that are, and I really encourage all of you to check it out. It's called pluginsights.com. And it's essentially an opt-in survey tool. So if you think that your opinions are valuable and you would like to have someone help you get those to the automakers or the utilities or the industry, this is an organized form to make that happen. So we have thousands of members, and we have them in all different categories, from pre-owning an EV to in the process of buying an EV to having owned an EV or being in the EV industry. So we have these different pools that we can ask really specific questions that industry wants to know to kind of help this happen, which I think is relevant to this conversation. And then PlugShare and Recargo had overlapped on a station finding app. And so I'll just briefly tell you about PlugShare. PlugShare was started, and one of the things we did in a unique way was that we let people share their homes, like we're doing today, to charge their vehicles. So if you didn't have an EV but you wanted to encourage the EV revolution, you could share your dryer outlet in your garage, or even your 110 outlet. And some people even put in charging stations at their homes just for sharing.
Wow.
Local people, there was one guy who put in 2 stations, one for his car, one for someone who might come by and share on PlugShare. So we have about 4,000 people across the U.S. sharing their home charging stations. In the beginning, that was predominantly 110 volt, and now it's moved up to full charging station, which is really cool. And that's about a quarter of all the charging stations out there. So there's about 20,000 stations that we have on our map. So that's PlugShare, and then on PlugShare we had moved down into more connected vehicle services. So we can actually see the state of charge from your iPhone or your Android to connect directly with your car. And we're also making a fleet management tool. So that's the merger, and that's the company as it is right now, all the way from fleet tools and connected car up to news and kind of all the stuff in between.
So 30 seconds, where's the
sorry, that was
EV
too
going
long.
to be in? Is it going to be the dominant vehicle type in, what, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
I think so. I mean, I think the industry
That's all
moves
right.
slowly,
Don't worry.
but
There you go.
there'll be at some point there'll be a tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that all cars will be EVs in. I think the majority of cars being purchased will probably be plug-ins or EVs in the next 10 years.
Okay.
And there is, we can talk about
That's a
that.
good stake in the
Yeah,
ground. We'll work
definitely.
from there.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Ellen, the elevator pitch, and
Okay.
also where will EVs go to be?
Okay, well, I think you've heard more than the elevator pitch. I don't want, you did a beautiful job of giving my whole history, so I'm gonna leave my personal history out of this. For those of you who are not familiar with Better Place, it's actually becoming a sad story, which is, it launched with great vigor, raised a lot of money in a number of rounds of financing, close to $900 million, I think, at last count. Operating in several countries, and I think this week's news was that there is a planned bankruptcy. So, so the company that I work for is a sad story, but I'm delighted to be sitting next to someone who's taken over a lot of the things that I think Better Place had hoped to provide. If you think about any number of these things, where are the places to charge, what's my battery level, all those things were built into something we called OSCAR, for OS for your car. Right, and all of that developmental work was, in hopes of, or with the notion that people who would buy EVs would need all these support services that would then make an EV as it would have all the advantages you get from your gas car today, but all the advantages in addition of an electric vehicle. So I'm delighted somebody else has taken over the charge. And so my prediction really has very little, I want to sort of say, I joined the company with full fervor. I believed in its mission. I certainly believed in the management team and was a good part of that. I do think we made some not so wise decisions in implementation, and I think frankly, the fate of the company has very little to do with the fate of the industry. And so I think a lot of companies will start and not make it along the way of any new industry, and I believe Better Place, gave its life that others may live in some sense. So I'm bullish on electric vehicles, but I will quote my prior boss at Intel, who's kind of the well-known economist, Halvarian, who said, "It's hard enough to predict the present, that I'll stick to that part of things," and I certainly see a bright future, but.
Yeah, we'll come back to what you said, because I think that's, really well said. At the beginning of a new industry, you always see a lot of really good things that for one reason or other don't make
Work
it.
out, right.
Automobiles, there were what, 20 or 30 different major automobile companies of the early 1910s, most of which were EVs,
Yeah. Yes.
right?
Right.
So
Great.
one of the reasons that they couldn't survive in comparison to the gasoline-powered car was the lack of infrastructure.
Right.
Mike, this comes to you.
Absolutely. I should have planned that one
Great
quite well.
transition.
I don't need to say anything now. So, let me talk a little bit about, briefly on myself. Prior to joining Schneider Electric, I founded EV Advise, which was really out there promoting new and innovative business models around electric vehicle charging. I think when folks look at what this charger looks like, they say, great, I could go get a charge, I can get gas filled in my tank, it's the new gas, right? But this business, you'll come to understand, is well beyond that. This is all about loyalty programs, integrative marketing, social media, interaction, where you can actually trade off, and this will sound a bit heady, but this will trade off, and this was the vision we had, your thinking for vehicular miles. people will actually pay you to drive. So not only will we get ourselves off foreign oil, not only will we have mitigation strategy for carbon emissions, but actually it will become cheaper for us to drive, and it'll actually become not only free to drive, but actually may come to the point where you will get paid to drive. And that sounds kind of a bit challenging, right? I get paid to drive when I go to San Jose Airport and I park there and I do my normal business and pay for parking. San Jose Airport pays me to drive home. They picked up the tab. So it's not far-fetched, it's not a far-fetched concept. We're going to talk all about those business models. So now, why Schneider? I had this startup company and Schneider came to me and said, look, great vision, but we have a great company. So why don't you come run the startup company within the big company? And that was a great match. And really, why I decided that this was a great match for both parties was Schneider Electric is a $35 billion global leader in energy management. So we basically architect energy efficiency throughout the world. We don't have a big brand name here because we're predominantly a B2B company. We're sort of like the French-based company with the German name that's headquartered in Hong Kong, Palatine, and I run it out of Los Gatos, California in EV. But the challenge in why we're in business is our energy needs as a globe are going to double between now and 2050. So from historic times to now, and from now to 2050, we'll actually double all of our energy needs. And at the same time, we're trying to reduce our carbon emissions in half. So that dilemma is really at the cornerstone of Schneider Electric's strategy. And that's what we're here to do, is crack some big problems. Big problems in building energy management, big problems in intelligent transportation, and certainly electric vehicle as a part of infrastructure. To put that infrastructure in place will unleash the power of EV. And I think we'll talk a little later about the chicken and egg, and we have some great opportunities to chat through some of the questions. So I'm here to drive that initiative, to deploy electric vehicle charging infrastructure everywhere, and we'll talk about when there's that tipping point. I've been public to suggest that there's a good way to frame this, and I think you guys will find this interesting. I hope you do. I look at the first production EVs were launched in 2011. Now you could say the Tesla Roadster was around in 2010, and you could say that prior to that the GM and all the EVs and stuff, but reality says 2010 was a sort of a kit car for the rich and famous, if you will. A great car. And in fact, that when I took a test drive in there, I really committed my energy efficiency background to EVs. So I highly recommend taking a test drive in an EV. It's an amazing experience. So first production cars are in 2011. Let's call that the first year, bolt and leaf. If that's sort of year zero, to quote Kelly Becker in the back from Schneider Electric, we look at 3 phases. The game is won and lost between now and the end of the decade. So if you look at the 3 phases inclusive, the 3 years, we have what's called the EV ready phase. That's when most of the infrastructure gets put in place well before the adoption of EVs. So the chicken and egg says, well, if I don't have enough infrastructure, I'm not going to buy a car. Well, if I don't see enough cars, I'm not going to buy a charger.
Yeah.
We can talk through this.
Yeah.
But so there's 3 years of EV ready. And then there's 3 years of EV willing. So it's EV ready, willing, and able. 3 years of EV willing says there's now enough charging infrastructure, I am willing to make an EV purchase. And then there's EV able, where I'm able to charge everywhere without thinking. So now you can start to frame your thinking across a 9-year period from 2012 to end of the decade inclusive, like Forrest mentioned, between a lot of things on the end of the decade, and look at the various ramps of business. And I'll hold it from there because I know we have discussions, but you're going to see that this is a disruptive innovation, to quote Clayton Christensen type analysis. It is absolutely part of Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm analysis, which in fact we'll host a Jeffrey Moore session next week at Schneider. And you can see that this is going to go mainstream, but it's not there yet.
Okay, that's great. So the next question that follows is how do we get there from here? And Forrest, on the technology side especially, but in really anything, what do you see as the biggest challenges to really greater adoption, reaching the tipping point for EVs? Is it the range of the car? Is it the charging station? What do you see as the main problems, and how to approach those challenges?
Yeah, well, our internal view is that one of the biggest problems in our charter, the reason we started, was that really information is one of the biggest problems. So people don't know how many how much infrastructure really exists. So, you know, Mike at Schneider can put in all this infrastructure, but if people don't know it's there, then you don't get them buying because they know it's there. So right now we show 20,000 stations across the U.S. There are more stations in San Francisco than gas stations in certain, like in the financial district, and it's getting close to being the more for the entire city. So I predict probably by the end of next year there'll be more places to charge than there will be places to get gas.
What
in the city.
about interoperability? Are the charging stations developing kind of standards that anyone can charge any car into the same station?
Unfortunately not. It's been standard. It's been pretty standard up till now, and now
Yeah.
it's actually fragmenting.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's much of a problem because the infrastructure is this funny chicken and the egg thing. Because to buy a car, people want to see a lot of infrastructure, and then when they have a car, they don't use it because they don't really need to. And so it's hard with the information piece. It's hard for people to understand what the driving case is like until they have it, and then when they do have it, they're going to do what's easiest and cheapest for them. And so I've driven 24,000 miles in the last 2 years in a Nissan Leaf. I paid extra to have a fast charging port.
Okay.
I've only charged once with a fast charger, and I drive a lot. I've done 190 miles in a day around the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Charging at every location, level 2,
Yeah.
level 2, and then home.
Okay.
And so there's just a kind of a disconnect between what people understand and
But
Was
he
that
can
much
do
of-
that
was
because he
that
has a
much of
great app.
Right.
Yeah, was it much of a lifestyle change in terms of getting used to more frequent charges? And you know, so I'm used to a car that runs for 250 or 300 miles on a tank of gas.
Right. No, it's actually, I mean, it's a lifestyle change for the better. So there's a few caveats, and that's why information is important. It's not the right time to buy an EV if it's your only car. Luckily, that is really a minority of U.S. people that have one car, which is a crazy number. I mean, there's more cars in this country than people, I'm pretty certain.
Yeah.
So it's this funny situation where you have so many people that have multiple cars. If you have one car in the family that's your long distance car, one car that's your EV, you're going to have a lifestyle improvement because you're not going to go to the gas station. So my wife hates going to the gas station, and with the EV, you never go to the gas station. You're full every morning.
Yeah.
You drive your day and you get home. It's full the next morning. You know, so that lifestyle change was nice. There's the lifestyle change that range affects is the important part, and so range is a big issue because it is just that now at the limit of what people find acceptable, and Tesla has surpassed it, and they're really the shining star, and so let's use them as a benchmark. So this is the interesting thing about range. Right now, range for cars is improving in the around 10 to 15% per year mark, which means it's doubling about every 5 years, and that's been steady for the last 10 years. And there's a couple of ways you can check that. One is you can see how fast stuff goes from the lab to the car, and that's about 5 years, and you can see like what it is in the lab, and it's about 2 to 3 times the density. So it's going to continue on that at least for the next 5 or 10 years. And so imagine a Tesla now goes 300 miles, and it's a $85,000 car or $80,000 car. In 5 or 6 years, it's going to be half the price or go twice as far. So that's where I think it's really the game changer, because right at about 150 miles or 200 miles, just from my personal experience, you really don't need to charge much.
Ellen, let me ask you to pick up on this. From the consumer standpoint, what kind of experience do you really need to have, and how do we get there?
First of all, I'd like to emphasize the point that was just made, which is there is even a lack of awareness of what's available today.
Yep.
So, you know, who's marketing this, right? The Toyota Prius took a while to take off, not because it wasn't a great car and not because people didn't see value. They didn't market it. It was a hidden secret, right? And so one of the questions is, you know, who is going to put the kind of marketing investment into this that will make it kind of an exciting opportunity for people? You know, at this point, there's Tesla and Nissan's pretty quiet about the Leaf.
Yeah.
They're not. This is
Once in a
not front
while
and
you see
center.
the Volt on TV.
Yeah, once in a while you see the Volt. That's right.
Yeah.
And
There's
there
been
is a
Leaf ads on
problem.
TV.
Yeah, I have not. Well, maybe I don't watch enough TV.
If you ever search for it, I
They're
can't
not
go to a
on the
website
Super
without
Bowl.
having a Nissan Leaf ad because I'm in the industry and
Yeah,
they just
well,
latched onto my IP address.
It's
so.
retargeting.
They know what
Those guys
websites
really,
you
they're
visit.
good
I
at
bought one
retargeting.
already. I don't need to see this one.
Right.
The best advocate for
Um,
Volt is the CEO of Salesforce, who says he's gone a year and has never had to put gas in his
Yeah.
So-
But
So-
I think your point is really right.
My point is, you know, that in some sense, there's another chicken and egg problem, which is, when does industry really get behind it, or some other source that actually makes it, okay, so that's one element. Another element I do think is this, you know, we're obsessed with the notion of range, but most of us really don't drive outside of an EV range, right? And especially, as you say, in cases where there are two cars, where there's more than one person at home, there's two cars, and one's the main car that for travel purposes. And so most people are unaffected by this. And nobody is really all that upset that their phone or computer doesn't last for a week, right? You get used to plugging it in.
Yeah.
You get used to plugging it in when you get home. You get used to plugging it in when you're at any other place. So there does need to be an infrastructure. There's no question about that. But the point is that we just have this model in our head that somehow your car can go X miles on a tank of gas and that's your range. You know, if you think about it, like any other, thing that you depend on, your phone is sort of something that people will go home for their phone, they won't go home for their wallet, right? That phone is the quintessential, most necessary thing in your lives today. The fact that it doesn't last you a day without charging, you know, I mean, you whine about it, but it doesn't stop you from buying the next phone, right? Nobody's really upset. So the point is that there is this process that has to happen with very quick iterative cycles so that the infrastructure is built, people buy the cars, right? Right now, I can tell you, I know where a lot of charging stations are. I don't know which of them are available. And I would sort of say that piece of it concerns me. Like, if, you know, I did a lot of work for a company in San Francisco, and I can make it in a Nissan Leaf from here to San Francisco, not a problem. But I want to be able to charge when I'm there. Now, there are 2 spaces in that parking lot that have a charging spot. How do I know? Can I book it, you know?
Yeah.
Can I reserve that spot so I know I'm going to be able to charge there? And that's, you know, so you guys, you know, I think there's
version
both
2.0, right?
Yeah, there's both the technology development and then there's the business partnerships. There's the development of the whole ecosystem that makes all of that possible. So I think consumers can get there very quickly in their head if we stop focusing on range, start marketing the cars,
Yeah.
and get used to the model that we have.
Ellen, I want to come back to you, but Forrest, are you already doing this kind of thing where you can reserve a space?
No, and I actually don't believe that reservations are a good thing. So we could argue about
Okay.
that. Might be interesting. But we do show availability. So you can on our app right now show on about 55% of the stations you can see availability,
Yeah.
and we also show probability of it being open. So during that time of day, how often is that station likely to be
Okay,
open?
that helps
And
a
a lot of
bit.
them are quite high.
That
So,
helps a bit.
And I think it's useful, but I personally as a driver you go through a progression as a driver, and I don't know if everyone will go through the progression, but in the beginning you're very nervous when you're down to 20 miles of range left. Now I just go past 0 and I just, you know, it doesn't bother me. I get home, I drive 10 miles, 20 miles past 0 on my Leaf all the time.
Okay.
I just use it, you know, I just use it, and you know, it is a thing to be, you know, get you places and to be used. And so 15 miles used to make us nervous. So my point is that I try to get home by 0, but if I'm at 5 miles and I'm, you know, 5 miles away, I don't feel nervous. But in the first 6 months I did, and my wife and I both did, and now we don't. And so that changes how you use infrastructure.
So how
I
many
live a mile
drive
away.
an- How many drive an internal combustion engine with the gas gauge at E?
Right, yeah.
You get down to reserve tank or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And every once in a while,
Yeah.
you run out of gas and you feel dumb, and you don't do that. And you know, I haven't done that for a long time in my gas car, and I haven't run out yet on an EV. But
Okay. Ellen, what I wanted to get back to you with is, why aren't they marketing this more? The Leaf and the Volt. And specifically, I want to ask you about this ugly word called price.
Okay. I'm happy to
Because,
talk
you know,
about price.
in regard to
Yeah.
the hybrid version
Yeah.
of, say, the Honda Civic or the Nissan Altima or whatever, you're talking $5,000 more.
Yes.
than the regular gasoline version, right?
Oh, I wanna talk about this part.
Go ahead, it's yours.
So, I'm gonna refer to the same models that, Mike did, which is, Jeffrey Moore, and company, and there were actually a fair amount of research done before Jeffrey ever popularized this notion of crossing the chasm. But it turns out that people who buy a product early on are actually price insensitive. And we're focusing again on the wrong thing, because people who buy innovative products are usually the people who are more educated, higher income, greater resources, etc. They start the innovation cycle. They are the innovators, the early adopters, etc. And so trying to argue that this is a way to save is a poor marketing tactic for an innovative product.
Right, totally agree.
If you're marketing a Main Street product, great strategy. First, at least, great is a strong term. I'm a marketer. I'm not going to say it's a great strategy, and I'm sure that all the folks here at the Hayden Group would agree with me that marketing by price is not a great strategy ever, but it's a particularly poor strategy in an innovative product. And what you therefore have to sort of say is, what is a marketing strategy for an innovative product? And that's where I'm going to refer to Clayton Christensen again and sort of say the important thing to think about is that we buy products not because we want those products. We're hiring that product for a job to be done, okay? And I don't know how many of you have read this notion of a job to be done, so I don't want to bore you if you all are familiar with it, but if you're not, I'll give you a 2-minute intro and then send you to Clayton Christensen. The notion is that when I buy a milkshake, or I buy a car, or I buy a drill, I'm not buying the drill because I want it. I'm hiring that drill to do a job for me. In the case of a drill, I'm hiring it because I want a 1/4-inch hole, and this drill will give me a 1/4-inch hole. So why do we buy a car? The obvious answer is we hire a car to get us from place to place. Okay, guess what? We wouldn't have anything like the array of cars we have today on the road. Nothing, the install base wouldn't look like anything if what we were doing is hiring cars to transport us. We would all be driving Kias. We would all be driving, 1-seaters. We would all, you could think about what we would be driving. We would not be driving the car we're driving. We are hiring this car to perform a lot of different jobs that we have. And so if you think about it, what is it that you would hire an EV to do? And the answer is that, there, for some people, I don't think this is, I know this is not a common need. For some people, the reason is they want a quiet environment in which they can go from here to there. An EV is better at that. But you know what? We're used to it. We turn up the volume of the radio. Not many of us are really craving a quieter environment to get it while we're going from here to there. So what are we hiring an EV to do? And what do we hire a BMW to do? And what do we hire a Prius to do? And it's fairly clear that we hire a Prius to do a couple of things. One of them is, we are in fact hiring the Prius to reduce our carbon footprint, right? And we're hiring a Prius in hopes of reducing our dependence on foreign oil. And we're hiring a Prius to do a whole bunch of things. And we're, most of all, I would sort of say, a lot of people are hiring a Prius to convince, to make themselves feel good about their contribution to a better planet. And they're hiring that Prius to tell the world that they believe in that, and they want other people to adopt that strategy. And so the net of it is that the EV is a much better product to hire for all of those jobs. The question is, who knows it? And can we overcome a few of the little barriers that get in the way of that car performing that service for us? And I think the answer is yes. And the research actually that we did early on in this sort of showed this is one product that both Republicans and Democrats want to hire. The Democrats want to hire it because they think that climate change is a real problem. They think that they ought to be doing something about it. They think they want a better environment. Well, the Republicans are hiring it, are interested in hiring it because they care about foreign oil, and it's a safety and security thing. Now, can you market it that way? Can people become aware of it? It's fairly easy actually to do. It takes some skill. And none of the car companies are doing that. And that was your other question, but I think I've talked too much
no,
already.
This is great.
Well,
Yeah.
Let me throw things to Mike for a minute
Yes.
and ask on the business side of things.
Mhm.
Okay, so business models are absolutely essential to anything becoming real in the real world. Are there business problems? Are there business model problems with EVs? And this kind of from the standpoint of what you see with Schneider.
Sure. There's business model problems with EVs and there's business model opportunities with EVs, right?
Okay.
So one of the classic problems with the business models is how do you make money on putting a charging station in front of your store and collecting fees for that? How do you make money on that? So in the early going, I had a lot of entrepreneurs pay me to tell them, how do I make money? I want to invest. This is the next great thing. And I'd say, don't get so hopeful on that one. But here's what I would tell you. And it goes something like this. You have an energy, you have to put in the CapEx, you have to maintain on the OpEx, you have to put in, let's say, a $10,000 charger, $5,000 for the charger and $5,000 for the install roughly. Mm-hmm. And you have to pay for that. And now you're going to get these folks that are going to come in and charge, right, and pay you what? $1 an hour? And then you start doing the math. And there was some tremendous, I love this, it was great naysayers. EVs will fail miserably, nobody will put infrastructure in place because the math we did, framed from the way we framed it, and this is important how we framed it, suggests that it'll be 13 and a half years before you recoup that, even with government grants. It's dead. And I just thought, oh, that's perfect. Because none of this has to do with making fees. This has to do with, let me give you one example, an indirect monetary benefit of employee retention. Okay, you've got the coolest company. You're going to hire the coolest person who's the smartest person out of Stanford who's going to make a choice of where they're going to work. Okay? And they're either going to work for the company who's showing that they have cool EVs and willing to pick up their energy and drive for free, or they're going to work for the company that decides that EV charging isn't that exciting. And this is going to get simple. How about, you mentioned the demographic, postgraduate degree, fairly affluent, fairly techie. How about the critical software program in the critical path of your new blockbuster software, who's driving an EV, or she's driving an EV, and you say, sorry, we're not going to support you at the workplace. What's that worth to you? That could be worth $4 million to put an EV charger in your business. So here's an example of where it's the classic view of how you frame this. So employee retention is huge. Making a statement, marquee sustainability. Caesars Entertainment, the largest gaming company in the world, is pushing Code Green. What does Code Green mean? It's their give back to sustainability and to society to say, we know we're in the business of gaming, and we're in the business of resorts, and we own big properties, and we're a big entertainment firm, okay? But we need to give back. We need to make sustainability our number 3 mission. So by putting EVs in, they say, okay, we got that sustainability initiative. But guess what else it leads to? Loyalty programs, player cards, comped charges, come right this way, VIP service, valet servicing. What's that worth to a company? Okay, millions of dollars for that $10,000 installation. So you see the difference in how you frame the businesses. So there are challenges and there are opportunities.
Yeah, and just quick follow-up. So that's all part of a bigger package, right? Where you put in that as one of the costs because of indirect benefits and so forth. We were talking before we started the session about Tesla announcing today that they're going to triple the number of supercharging stations. So this is a vertical integration, right? They're doing both the charging station and the vehicle.
Sure.
Is that going to continue, or what's going to happen in that?
With Tesla or with the general public? So,
Both.
So with Tesla, it should continue because Tesla has a unique standard. It's their own standard. And frankly, they were, in some way, the timing of the standards development as far as plug standards was such that the company made a decision that it couldn't wait for the DC quick charging. And I think it was actually a practical decision. In retrospect, You know, would they have preferred an open standard? Sure. Would it have been as cool and size-wise, would it have fit their spec? Likely not. So they've then determined that if their vision was intact, and it is, and they know that they are going to compete head-to-head with the largest incumbents, including Mercedes and BMW, which incidentally they outsold in the last 2 months.
Which is so great.
Which is
Wow.
huge. And so guess who's awakened to this? However, BMW has a great strategy, okay? Because BMW was born EV as well. So BMW is going to announce some amazing things. Some of you may already be privy. And Mercedes has already announced a product that they'll work with Tesla. So you're seeing a movement, a great movement here of coming along. One of the chief technologists of Volkswagen, who was the last holdout because they had diesel and they were driving a diesel strategy, and 2 years ago you couldn't get Volkswagen to show their EV. And just recently, one of their chief technologists said, the days of EV are no longer reversible. We're going to invest $5 to $7 billion a year. So what does that mean? Okay, so that, you know, that's the second largest car company and maybe the first largest car company in the world. So, so Chevy, Toyota, Mercedes, BMW, Tesla.
Yeah.
So will the infrastructure be required? It will be, and now you can get a Tesla from LA to New York. You can't do it right now. Actually, it was recently done, but let's call it in a practical way where you don't have to what? You don't have to think about it. We talk about reservation systems. You talk about, you know, wanting to get to where you want to be. We're in the early EV ready phase. Don't get so excited that it's going to change literally tomorrow or next week or next month. But when we're in the EV able phase, you will go anywhere in San Francisco and simply plug in. And you may not even have to plug in because you'll hover over a wireless connected charge. So in 9 tiny little years, and in 7 years from now, it'll be a completely changed world. Okay, and that's what we're about to face here, and that's frankly what you're all interested in.
Is that because Tesla has been pushing the boundaries to make that happen, where they had that recent announcement where by 2015, I don't forget the exact numbers, but they're planning on increasing the coverage of their cars, how they travel, which you were speaking to, from over 100 miles. Plus, they're increasing the amount of their plug-in stations so that you can go across the country to be able to plug in. And what I'm hearing from you is also that right now there's not standardization, so that kind of what I was thinking when you were talking about it is, depending upon what car you have, you know, is it across the board? You can go into like any gas station now with any model.
Is it okay if I clarify the standardization issue? And this is it
yes,
in a nutshell.
do.
There is a standard J plug for virtually all electric vehicles today except the Tesla. But the Tesla owners have a standard little adapter that they carry around for $400. So effectively they can charge at our station. So that's fine. That's called level 2 charging, ubiquitous charging. That standard exists in the United States, and that's what's unleashed this new momentum and adoption. In Europe, each country has a different standard, and it's causing trouble. Now, so you say, but what about the standards issues? You know, what's going on there? Well, there is a standard called J-Plug. It's affectionately known as the J-Plug, J1772 standard, SAE. The challenge is in the DC quick charging standards, and there is a de facto standard that exists today called CHAdeMO. Nissan is driving that. We call it Japanese ink. And there is now a challenger to that standard. So now you're saying, oh gosh, there's 3 standards? But really, there's still a standard to charge all your cars in the most use cases we just discussed. There is some grappling about who's going to win the DC. I mean, so it's not ideal, but it's not the Betamax versus VHS argument, because companies don't have to put out multiple content. A Nissan can say, I choose that one. Tesla says, I choose that one. And BMW says, I choose that one. And if I'm a BMW owner, I drive up, I pull the BMW standard out, Tesla pulls theirs, and Nissan pulls theirs. It's the same station. It's not there yet, but it'll be worked out. So I actually think that the lack of awareness, and you talk about education, and there's different ways to educate, is what's holding some people back. I'd say, why don't you buy an EV? Oh, I'm not buying a Sony Betamax and find myself obsolete. It's not a properly framed answer. They're uneducated. So we educate folks on that, and they say, really? You mean I can buy from BMW, Tesla, or Nissan, and still get a quick charge? Yes. Done. That's the standards. Now, there is some roaming standards, like the Bank of America versus Wells Fargo days, which I think we're still being hit up with at 250 a head. There is now some roaming standards that Forrest was alluding to around networking standards. So if you're running out of juice and you pull up to this and you don't have a subscription with that, you can't get a charge. But again, these are quickly becoming collapsed. These are everyone knows this. Nobody wants to monopolize, maybe they do, but it's not going to happen. And we're seeing a democratization in integration standards. And worse, I carry 2 little key fobs on my keychain along with my kids, my Petco, and my Safeway.